So, continuing with Chapter 9 and political parties, the differences in the major political parties. So, remember what I said yesterday, the differences between Democrats and Republicans are some of the ones that you see here. It's basically how they view the role of government in society. Democrats favor a more active role for the government, and Republicans favor less active or a more free market. Now, third parties. You have the two major parties, but what role do third parties play in American politics? Because we know there are other parties besides the two major parties, besides Democrats and Republicans. So any party that's not a Democrat, the Democrats or the Republicans, any smaller party are called third parties in our system. They're not called that in a parliamentary system because they're just a multi-party system, but in our system, because we're a two-party system, any smaller party is called a third party. And they rarely win elections, but they do influence elections. They can highlight issues that the other major parties tend to ignore. So often things like with the Green Party, those are environmental issues. And they also can play what we call a spoiler role. So they can take enough votes from one of the major party candidates that it can cost the major party the election. In the past, we've had some very significant third parties, and some of them have had a very big impact on the country. The populists, which were very popular again in the 1890s, were the ones that helped get the amendment for the direct election of senators. Remember, before we had that amendment, senators were selected by the state legislatures. They also argued for the 8-hour workday, so workers' rights. So the populist third party was very influential in making some of these key changes. Progressives from the progressive era really affected the 1912 presidential election, and they took votes from Republicans and allowed Woodrow Wilson to win the election for the Democrats. So the progressives split off votes from Republicans. And they wanted the direct primary, where you vote for your nominee for your political party, and the ideas of initiatives and referendums, which we have and which we'll really be talking about in Chapter 10 on voting and elections. Initiatives and referendums are additional things that you can vote on in addition to political parties. And they have to do with legislation. There's some main reasons why third parties show up. Why aren't the Democrats and Republicans enough? There's a couple of reasons. You have things like the Prohibition Party, which are single issue parties. They have one thing they want to get accomplished, and other than that, they don't really care. So they want the single thing passed. And once they get what they want, the party dissolves. You have ideological parties that focus on changing the country in a specific direction. The Communist Party, the Libertarian Party, the Socialist Party. These are ideological parties that want to change the country to their ideological viewpoint. And the third type are just independent candidates. This is really the cult of personality. These are parties that come and form around a person. Okay, so the Independent Party was created for Ross Perot, who ran for the White House in the 1990s as an independent, but he was a very strong personality, and so a party formed around him. Someone like Bernie Sanders, if Bernie Sanders were to break away from the Democratic Party, you could see a third party forming around him because he's such an incredibly popular individual. Now, in a multi-party system like what they have in many countries in Europe, it's different. They don't have third parties, as I said. They have many parties in their system. This gives you an example. Canada has 3 parties, Germany has 5, Israel has 20 parties. And so what that means is that no one party tends to get a majority. And so in order to run the country, they form coalitions. Okay. The thing about a multi-party system is that you don't really have minority rights being trampled on because all viewpoints are heard. In Great Britain, they have the Scottish Independence Party, which literally wants Scotland to break off. And so even though they can never win enough votes in Parliament to run the UK, their voice is heard in that system. So if no party wins a majority, the party with a plurality, so more than anyone else, but less than half, okay, has to form a coalition with another party or parties in order to get a majority. So you have multiple parties, one party gets, say, 48% of the vote. Well, that's not enough. You have to have a majority. So they need to get to 51% in order to rule. So what they'll do is they will join and form a partnership with some other parties, get them to join their coalition, and they'll rule together. And in exchange, they'll kind of say, okay, I'll work on your issues and we'll pass some of this legislation that's important to you if you'll join our coalition government. Coalitions often, though, break down because there's a lot of fighting between parties. And when that happens, when the coalition breaks apart, you lose your majority, you're no longer in power, and then you have to have a whole new election. So in parliamentary systems, new elections happen a decent amount. Now, there are countries with one-party system, okay? The party and the government are the same thing. This would be communist countries, okay? Elections are held to pick who is the best to do the party's work, not on any ideas of that party, okay? That looks like a spelling error there, I apologize. But parties era. So elections are held to decide, like, who's in China. There's one party, there's the Communist Party, right? So when they have elections, it's to decide which communist gets to lead the party. There's no opposition because it's illegal to work against the party. So these are usually dictatorship type groups, okay? And obviously not a democracy. China and Iran are good examples of these one-party systems. Now, national party organizations in the U.S., the Democrats and the Republicans, they have a national committee, each party does, and they have representatives from each state that sit on that committee. And they have a chairperson that runs the committee. And so this is the person that basically manages the party, manages the office, all the staffing, raises money for the party. The chairperson leads the fundraising efforts for the party. The national committees recruit candidates. They help with campaign strategies. They organize the money. They create advertising on behalf of candidates. They basically do the work of the party in between elections. And they organize the party's national convention, which is held every 4 years in conjunction with the presidential election cycle. Delegates to the convention. So when you watch the Republican or the Democratic convention, you're looking at delegates. And those are chosen either by the primaries or the caucuses. When you vote in the primary or the caucus, you're actually selecting a slate of delegates to represent you at the party convention. And the delegates there write the platform and nominate the president and vice presidential candidates. Now, there are 50 state party organizations that focus on electing party members to state and local government levels, okay? They help the national committee with their campaigns in that particular state. So the Republican Party would have helped Donald Trump's campaign with his campaigning efforts in North Carolina, and the Democratic Party would have done the same thing for Hillary Clinton. Then you have the local and county organizations, which are often very strong depending on the county. So each state is divided into smaller parts called precincts. And then there's a precinct captain. And then they try to get as many people registered for their party as they can in their precinct. So they try to turn out, if they're a Democratic precinct captain, they're going to try to turn out as many and register as many Democrat voters as possible in their section. And their idea is to keep the pulse in the community. What's important to the community and what are the important issues to that community, and report that to the party, who then reports that to the state, who then reports it to the national, so they can form campaign strategies. Okay? And most of the day-to-day party work is done at the local county level. Both parties have county committees and a county chairperson. And in some areas or some states, these people are very powerful. In others, they're not as powerful, but they do most of the work of the party. Now, political machines are something we really talk about in the history books, okay? Chicago and New York and Boston are famous for their political machines. These are when local parties are really good at their jobs and are really good at bringing out the vote. And they organize like a political machine. They would guarantee votes and elections in their area. They became powerful at a time when there were no government programs to help immigrants. So when you came from Ireland and you immigrated to the United States, a party members of the political machine would come and help find you a job and help find you housing, and in exchange you would agree to vote for candidates that they selected. It was really a pretty ingenious system, if not ethical. So again, they helped them find jobs, get medical care, and other things in exchange for their vote. And the problem is they became very corrupt or very unresponsive to the people. They became sort of a form of organized crime. But the machines were most famous was Tammany Hall in New York City, and then Chicago had some pretty big political machines. Now, political parties play a lot of roles. They nominate candidates. They campaign for those candidates. They inform citizens about the issues. They help manage the government, right? So we know that. They provide the leadership, right? So the majority party runs both the Senate and the House. They link different levels of government, right? So at the state, local, and the national level, people of the same party are connected. And they perform a watchdog role. They kind of keep track on the other party. So the party in power is watched closely by the party that's not in power. So Democrats right now are playing a watchdog role over Republicans. When it comes to nominating candidates, those are usually done through what we call primaries, primary elections, or a direct primary. And so people who vote in primaries choose among several party members to run for the party in the general election. A closed primary is where only people that are members of that party can vote in the primary. So different states either have closed or open primaries. In a closed primary state, when you register to vote, you have to indicate whether you are a Republican or a Democrat. And then when it comes to the primary voting day, if you're a Republican, you'll show them your voter ID card. It'll show that you're a Republican, and then you can vote in a Republican primary. If you are a Democrat, the same thing. If you're an independent, you don't get to vote in the primary election. So that's one of the bad things about being an independent, is that if you're an independent and you live in a closed primary state, you don't have the opportunity to vote in the primary elections. Now, in an open primary, anyone from either party can vote. So if you live in an open primary state, you just go in and say, I want to vote in the Democratic primary, I want to vote in the Republican primary. And if you're an independent, you can still vote in the primary. You can just go in and say which primary you want to vote in. North Carolina is an open primary state. Most states favor closed primaries, though, because they want to make sure that only the best candidates are running. They want to make sure that party members are choosing their nominees. So in an open primary, theoretically, if you're a Republican, you could choose to vote in the Democratic primary to try to elect the weakest Democratic candidate to run against your person, and vice versa. You can actually cross over and vote in the other party's election primary. So that's an interesting thing that can happen. So in a closed primary, you can't do that. Only party members can vote on who their nominees will be for various offices in a closed primary. Plurality is how most primaries work. Whoever gets the most votes wins, and wins that state. If no one wins a majority over 50% in the primary, the top two vote getters usually run against each other in a runoff election in most states. Again, it varies by state, but usually if you have three candidates, say, running for a Senate seat, for the Republican nomination for a Senate seat, if no one gets more than 50%, they might take the top two vote getters and do a runoff election. Campaigning. Basically, when it comes to political parties, raise a lot of money for candidates. It's pretty important. They will do things like design their advertising campaigns. They'll write speeches and do all of that on behalf of the candidate. They'll promote them. They'll put up the posters, hand out the yard signs, give out flyers. They register people and they get them to the polls. So that's how they help with the campaign. Remember, political parties are there to get people elected. They inform citizens, so they explain the key issues to the public. Good example of this would be Obamacare and healthcare. Republicans want to appeal it, Democrats want to improve it, so they're going to inform the public of what are the issues with that bill. They set up websites and they do all these things. They buy all those ads that you see, and we'll be looking at some ads coming up. They also listen and find out what are the concerns the people have and try to come up with policies that will satisfy those concerns. There are some grassroots movements, so if strong enough, parties may adopt their ideas. People get, like the Tea Party is a good example of this. People who really wanted economic reform. And so they started a grassroots movement, and the Republican Party basically adopted a lot of the Tea Party's ideas. They also manage the government, okay? So they help assign government jobs, like Speaker of the House, Minority Leader, Majority Leader, etc. And Congress and state legislators are organized and carry on their work on the basis of party affiliation. So the North Carolina General Assembly also, the majority party, which is the Republicans, also hold all the leadership positions. The minority party, the Democrats in the North Carolina General Assembly, have some of the other leadership positions, although they're not as powerful. They link levels of government, as we said. So here is the mayor is linked to the governor, who then links to the president. Obviously, my slide needs to be updated. The woman on the left is the current Charlotte mayor, Jennifer Roberts. That is the former governor, Pat McCrory, and the former president, Barack Obama. So now that would be Roy Cooper, of course, and Donald Trump. So they work on developing relationships and working environments between the different levels of government. And they also help solve problems. Again, acting as a watchdog. The party that loses the election can watch the other party. This forces the party that's in control, the party in power, to make sure it's doing its job and doing what they said they were going to do on the campaign trail. Otherwise, the party out of power will accuse them of lying to the people. And competition forces the parties to listen to the American people. That concludes this presentation on Chapter 9 and all the notes on Chapter 9.